Welcome to the Power of Your Voice podcast with your host, Johnny Gorky. You have the power to overcome challenges and fears. Let my voice and the voice of many others show you how to transform these challenges into opportunities. To learn more about future podcasts and read episode show notes, check out my website at www.thepowerofyourvoice.com.
This is episode 12, and today's guest is Stefanos Sifandos. Stefanos facilitates transformational growth through neuro-empowerment practices and integration of spiritual praxis and Western psychology to improve and enhance the quality of your relationships. Stefanos believes that intimate relationships and the sacredness in union is a direct path to enlightenment and freedom. Immersed in deep men's empowerment work and intimate relationships, Stefanos merges the best of Eastern and Western methodologies and philosophies to promote balance, sacredness, and joy in life. Using integrative techniques and methods, Stefanos has created programs and systems to enhance the quality of your life, your intimate relationships, and in essence bring you closer to your potential. Having worked with elite special force soldiers, Olympic gold medalists, and some of the best fighters, multiple world championships, and leveraging physical challenges, Stefanos has learned about the male condition. Having also traversed the depths of his own pain and fears profoundly, he has overcome destructive patterns and has faced multiple ego deaths. By restructuring and reframing his own masculinity and movement through the world as a man relating to himself, women, and his purpose, Stefanos has discovered and created methodologies for navigating the often difficult path of manhood. Through a deeper connection to God, Earth, and self, Stefanos has realized the power of the human spirit. Through his diverse, deep, and varied background for the last 15 years, Stefanos has been at the forefront of innovating the global health and wellness industry, whilst being a sought-after innovator in personal transformation, relationships, and leadership space. After struggling immensely most of his life with fear around freedom and commitment, developing deep into the shifting of his own path and shadows, Stefanos has now found incredible freedom through commitment with his beautiful fiancée, Christine. Steph, welcome to the Power of Your Voice podcast. I'm so excited because, your whole mission is to be the voice for the voiceless. And I'm like, just thinking about this now, it's like how ironic. I got the power of the voice, and then I got a guy here, Steph, whose mission is to be the voice for the voiceless. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I want to ask you a question. So you are a transformational coach who teaches healthy masculinity, which I absolutely love. So for those listening, tell us about your journey, how you overcame your past destruction patterns, fears, pain, depression, suicidal thoughts, and how you overcame your many ego deaths.
Yeah, so for me, it really stemmed from being quite restricted in expression when I was young. And so I grew up in a fairly volatile, physically violent, abusive, erratic environment, emotionally abusive environment as well. And so mum and dad were together, but it wasn't a very healthy example of what two people in marriage could be. And so myself and my brother grew up really every day not knowing what was going to happen. How was the day going to play out? We were going to get reprimanded, we were going to get yelled at, we were going to get beaten. And so it was just it was an unpleasant, really not very healthy place to be.
Wow.
And so as I got older, I became more withdrawn and more passive and less sort of out there in the world. Not that I was when I was a little child, when I was a small child, but I wanted to. And sort of just by learning through my environment and interpreting my environment in very particular ways, I started to withdraw from the world and became quite passive and really, really weak. I was overweight. I was very quiet. I was very shy. I just wasn't out in the world. And so as I hit my teens, my later teens, I got tired and very frustrated. My frustration turned to anger and aggression. I became more outward in the world and I became hyper aggressive. I was always getting into fights. I almost hit the reverse of what I was and sort of was on the pendulum between two extremes. And I sort of took that into my adulthood as well. And really, I was quite confused and just frustrated and very agitated and annoyed as a young adult. And I couldn't really understand that. emotionally. So cognitively and intellectually, I had my shit together, but emotionally inside I was a wreck. And so that would compound and would compound and would compound. And after a while, I'd just outburst either at myself, the way I would talk to myself, or I'd beat myself down, or I'd punish myself physically if I perceived myself to do something wrong. I'd literally hit the bike for, 4, 5, 6 hours at high intensity, the road bike, the push bike, I don't know what you call it, cycling, or yeah. I'd go and hit the bag, or I'd go and spar, or I'd roll in jiu-jitsu or whatever it was. And I'd burn myself physically. And I thought I was really conditioning myself. But when I unpacked all of that, it was me punishing myself. And I'd also take that out on my partners. If I was with a woman, if I was in a relationship, I'd be hostile with her. I'd be agitated and frustrated. I'd never be physically abusive, but just emotionally, just very distant, very non-approachable. And so for me, I had to really come face to face with all of that, all of this behavior that was really not conducive to my own health. And because I was bursting inside and I didn't know why. It's because I'd repressed and I'd suppressed and oppressed myself for so long of very unpleasant memories from when I was a kid, and didn't really deal with that at all. And so a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, when I really started looking deeper at that, that's when my life started to change. And it was quite challenging as well. It wasn't easy. And so I'm not the only one that has gone through tumultuous or turbulent times. Most of us, if not all of us, have. And most of us, if not all of us, have experienced some kind of expression of trauma or just painful experiences. And so it's how we deal with them which defines us and shapes us. And for me, I wasn't dealing with them at all. And when I was dealing with it, I was dealing with it in an unconscious way. In other words, my outlet was just being aggressive to the world. And so there was no rhyme and reason to it. There was no real logical connection. And so when I started really going deeper into that, and the catalyst for that was a breakup I had a number of years ago, where I was unfaithful in that relationship and dishonoring in that relationship. I was not truthful. I was not present. And so when all that became unraveled, it gave me an opportunity to really look at my stuff and really begin to define what it means to be a man for me, and what I think it means to be a good man, because being a man and being a good man are two different things.
Yes.
And so I began to really explore that at greater depth. And that's in short, that's part of my transformation and transition. And a lot has transpired from that particular incident because it really opened me up in many ways. It gave me an opportunity to allow myself to see myself through a different lens. And for me, that was very empowering.
So how did you overcome your struggles with fear and freedom of commitment? Because, for a lot of guys, we guys, sometimes we'll date a woman for 10 years before we're ever commit to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for me, I'd observed, like so many of us, I'd observed what I thought commitment was. I saw that in my parents, my friends' parents were coming from European backgrounds. My friends' parents were very similar as well, in the sense that they were just disjointed in their communication. They were hating on each other. They didn't treat each other with respect. And they were married for 20, 30, 40 years. And I was thinking to myself, wow, if this is what marriage is like, fuck that. Like, I didn't have healthy role models for marriage, right? I was quite insulated where I was. And so all I was more preoccupied was getting out of home. Let's get out of home. So I spent a lot of time on the streets. I spent a lot of time outside of home because home was just dangerous. Home was just yuck. Home was unpleasant. And so I didn't really pay attention to looking for healthy examples of relationship in my life. I was more paying attention to somewhat surviving, somewhat just trying to feel happy. And so when I began to look outside of that, my immediate environment, I began to realize that, wow, there actually are healthy dynamics out there of relationships between parents, between husband and wife. And so growing up, though, I was like, I'm not going to get married. I don't want to be married. I don't want to be in a long-term relationship. Yet I also thought it was the normal thing to do. And so I didn't want to go too far outside the norm, because I was already strange enough as it was with the way I thought about life and about things. I thought, well, I better, and I also wanted to be in a relationship too. And so I thought I'd better keep some level of normalcy, but I was in constant tension, because parts of me were like, I don't really want to be here. because there's too much of an association of what I experienced as a young person, which was an unhealthy, toxic examples of relationship. And at the same time, I enjoy being in a relationship, but I didn't know how to navigate it because it wasn't really healthy. I was just repeating patterns of my parents. And other unhealthy examples. And so for me, I had this fear of freedom and commitment. And when I started to unpack that with mentoring and psychology, and I mean, I've got a background in psychology myself, but we're the blindest to our own demise as well. We don't see our own stuff. We need someone else to come and shine a light on those dark spots and say, hey, what about that? We're generally very good at seeing it in other people. The ego is very good at that. And so I was quite good at seeing it in other people, never in myself. And so when I started that journey of looking deeper and being more open and being willing to look at all the dark stuff and the shadow within myself, that's when I started to realize, well, I have some really deep fears here. And so my infidelity was based on me attempting to find freedom. It was my version of feeling free and not feeling annihilated because of the unconscious associations I was making. So I apologize if this is a little bit too deep for, not that people wouldn't understand it. I just want to give detail and substance to some of the reasons, not excuses, but the reasons as to what I was doing, how I was behaving, what the come from was. And so the moment I started realizing all that was the moment I was able to just really release it and let it go. And I had to have for me, my experience was I had to have some pretty profound, intense, painful experiences to actually release viscerally that, because we store trauma in the body. We store trauma, physical trauma, the memory of trauma in our physical cells, in our physiology. And so for me, releasing that, it was a journey. It was a visceral journey. And I remember the day like it was yesterday when I released that commitment to that fear of commitment to freedom, and that fear of commitment and that fear of not being free. And again, the moment, there's another transitional pivotal point in my life as a man, the moment I released that, I began to witness freedom in so much, freedom in commitment, like literally freedom in being fully committed and fully present. And whether it be to an idea or to a belief system or to another human being or to an experience, whatever the commitment was, I was really present to it. And the fear, the constriction that I once used to have just wasn't there.
For some men out there, they may feel being masculine means being tough guy, being strong, having to do everything all on their own. How can we be a loving, connected man and still keep our masculinity at the same time?
Yeah, it's a practice. So being a loving, kind, compassionate man, they're virtues, they're characters, and they're what we would define as being a good man. And so a good man, or how we define being a good man, is really defined by the culture and the time that we find ourselves in. There are some basics that we require to be a man. Some of that is strength and courage. So strength, courage, mastery. There are various authors on masculinity that will speak to this. Strength, courage, mastery, and honor. And honor is a derivative of strength, courage, and mastery in play. And so we carry this utility in our world as men. And this is based, when we reduce the basic function of man, it is reduced to a biological and primitive function that still has some place in today's society. And so our battle, or our task, and that's another thing, by the way, men fighting or being challenged or fighting for something, whether it be a cause, whether it be resources, whether it be an ideal, that's also quite innate within us as well. And so if we don't have that expression in a healthy way or in a conscious, aware way, it usually presents itself in an unhealthy shadow aspect of self. And that's when we begin to really fuck things up for ourselves and for society. And so being a good man is defined by what is contemporary culture saying? Then there's tribes within tribes, there's gangs within gangs, there's pockets of society within pockets of society. And so we have to really begin to practice that ourselves. But it begins with a conscious choice. It begins with stating, okay, here's what it means to be a man. Am I really adhering to that? Am I being an honorable man according to how I am in the world? And then we can start to practice virtues in relationship to ourselves and in relationship to others. And those virtues take compassion and kindness for a moment. Just because we're strong and we're courageous and we have mastery over specific skills in our own world, in our own domain, doesn't mean that we can't be compassionate. Doesn't mean that we can't practice kindness. Men can still be strong, solid men and still be compassionate and kind. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And so we have to move away. We need to begin to move away from this fallacy of black and white or one way or the other way. You can't be a strong, dominant, healthy man. And I don't mean domineering is a difference, okay? Dominant over one's own domain. That means you have mastery over your faculties, over your inner faculties and the way you execute in the world. And of course, the skills that are required in community or tribe or family or society are going to be dependent. Your utility will be dependent on what society needs as well. This is a very complex, layered conversation. The point is that we have to be aware, firstly, and eliminate the idea that we have to be one or the other. Like being a man means we can't be a good man. Not at all. And so remember also, there are different definitions of good. Like you take, for example, a suicide, I'm going to use an extreme example, a suicide bomber. Now, a suicide bomber in their gang, in their tribe, in their pocket of belief, they're going to say, wow, he's courageous. He's strong. That takes massive courage to go do all that. He has mastery over his domain. He's a good man because he's doing this for God and this, or for our version of God or our expression of a divinity or whatever it may be. So we have to also understand that there is different expressions of what it means to be good. And at some point, because subjective relativism and cultural relativism, there are problems with that because it's saying that everyone's opinion is valid. Yes, and maybe not. And so this is where the complexity of this conversation takes a turn. It takes a really sharp turn. And so we have to begin to identify what it means to be good for us. For me, inclusivity is part of the new paradigm for men. Now, but without compromising our grounded virtues, our what it means to be a man. And so we have to be inclusive in the way we connect and communicate and treat ourselves and others. And sustainability is another virtue for me in terms of what it means to be a good man. Can we be sustainable in our decision making? So it's not just about short-term gratification, and it's not just about making decisions for the now. It's that, and do our decisions carry longevity in our generations to come as well? And so we're becoming more forward-thinking, more aware, more inclusive men and human beings, full stop. Because virtues aren't just limited to men; it's to every human, every sentient being.
So one of the things you talk about, so how can you find a deeper connection to God, earth, and yourself?
Yeah, I think, see, we undervalue the power of intention, and we undervalue the power of attention as well. And so whilst I can be specific here, and of course I will, and I'll speak for some examples for myself, it's very healthy for men, particularly because we're on this subject of masculinity, for men to really begin to define their own sense of self, what God means to them, what earth means to them, what honoring self, what that means to them. And again, that's going to be dependent on where they find themselves in life, their physical environment, but also their cultural landscape too. And so for me, I grew up being a Greek Orthodox, and so Western Orthodoxy, well, actually Eastern Orthodoxy to some extent. And so I was instilled from a young age that there's this idea of God, this monotheistic God exists. And I remember a particular scenario when I was young. I was about 10 or 11, and I could have been 9 maybe. But I remember the bed. I remember the day I was on my knees on the floor, and I was praying on the bed. And I was praying, my hands on the elbows and hands were on the bed. I was praying for my mum and my dad to stop fighting, and there's just so much turmoil. And in that same prayer, I was having this conversation quietly but out loud as well. My brother next to me, he was asleep. He was 5 years younger than me. And I came to this thing, it's like, you know what? I said, you know what? Fuck you, God. I'm not praying anymore because you're not helping. And that was the last time I prayed. Over, I don't know how old am I now? So I'm 36, so 25, 26, 27 years ago. And I only began to connect to God very recently again. And my version of God, my understanding of a higher power working through me being a tool, me being a vessel for expression, that there's even a higher version of self that resides within me. And I really take a very strong Vedantic view on this, an Eastern mystic Vedantic view on this, where the consciousness, bliss, is the highest form of expression, and it underpins our expression in this world. It is us, and at the same time, this is not us, is not me. And so I'm playing with, well, playing is maybe not the right word, but I'm exploring and being with and observing this higher aspect of self. Now, I've been able to connect to God. I've chosen to connect to what I call God, or the divine force or divine essence, because I've opened myself up again over the last few years, where I wasn't constricted and closed. And so I'm also seeing myself in a different light. I'm also seeing, in fact, I've always related to Earth in this way, that Earth should be treated with deep reverence and respect, because it is our source of physical life. And how we interact, how we extract resources, how we distribute resources, how we utilize energy at a socio-cultural, socio-economic platform right now, that's not healthy. It's not sustainable. And it's not inclusive. It's very exclusive. Mm-hmm. And so for me, understanding that and knowing that there is a better way, and there's so much technology and ideals out there and ethos and philosophy that underpins a better way to be in the world as a collective humanity, and not be so competitive at the expense of our own lives. Not that there's anything wrong with competition. It's just it's misdirected. Knowing that and really believing that, and then living from that place as often as possible and being more aware of it, that for me is how I honor Earth. I think I've explained how I honor God and self. Well, I'll go into a little bit more about self. It's being observant of how I'm behaving and how I'm being. Is there integrity? Is my inner world matching my outer world? My thoughts, my emotions, my beliefs? Does it match the way I behave in the world? Does it match the way I express and interact in the world? And being open and willing. Willing is a very powerful word. Being willing to transform if it's for the greater good, my greater good, and again, in an inclusive perspective, the greater good of all those around me as well. And so there's a willingness there. Willingness underpins that deeper connection to self, willingness to traverse fear, willingness to celebrate, willingness to look at the hard stuff, willingness to be open-minded, open-hearted, willingness to adhere to what it means to be a healthy, strong man. Willingness is a powerful, powerful word in my world.
The thing is, they so intertwine with each other. So one thing I want to say, so for guys that are listening to this right now and they want to get married, but they're scared of that commitment to get married, because I even include myself, I was dating my wife for about 5 years. I'm like, I wanted to marry her, but I was scared to do it, but I finally did. What would you say to guys like that?
Discernment and clarity are virtues that are part of, I believe they cross over in terms of they're part of being a man, of what defines being a man, and they're part of being a good man as well. And so there's a crossover there. And so discernment and clarity, we have to be discerning with the choices that we make. In other words, we must come back to that intention, which I sort of glossed over a little bit earlier. So this is a great segue into that. When we pay attention to ourselves and we observe our actions and behavior, and we allocate time to do that with a deliberate intention, we provide ourselves an opportunity to be in constant check with ourselves. Am I behaving the way I want to? Yes, I am. Great. Continue. No, I'm not. Do I need to pivot? What does that look like? And then we explore, and we do that from a place of responsiveness as opposed to reaction. It's not erratic. It's not panicky. It's stable. It's stoic almost. And so we're part of being stoic is an ability to face adversity with a calmness, and challenge and so forth. And so this discernment in self is very important. And it's derived from paying attention to what we want and moving with intention. So when we're making a choice, we're very aware of it and we're deliberate. It's not unconscious behavioral patterns or unconscious thought paradigms that are driving our decisions. And so when we come from this place, that requires us speaking truth. That requires us not living in lies, not pretending that we want to be in a relationship when we don't want to, or not pretending that everything's okay when it's not. Take fucking ownership of it. I'm scared. I don't know if I want to get married. And if that's a problem for you, then maybe we need to be apart. Or this is where I'm at. And we don't want to say that. We don't want to be, because we don't want to be confronted. Our brainstem is like on fire. We don't want to be confronted with the possibility of rejection or humiliation or abandonment. That's a massive wounding that's a collective psychological wounding for us from a primal position and from a social, a cultural position. And so we rather just keep that to ourselves and suffer in silence, but then behave in a way that is not in accordance with being in integrity. And so that discernment, having that discernment of being really honest with who we are and what we want is so important. And that leads to clarity. So the only way we can have clarity is to really step into our truth. So there's an element of courage that's required there as well. Courage isn't just about facing the lion in the jungle and overcoming that physical odd, and that could be something like that. But it's also being courageous with speaking our truth and stepping into our truth as men. And so if you can't get honest with yourself and what you want, you won't be able to give that to your woman. She's going to pick up on that because from a brain physiology perspective, a neurological perspective, her intuition is far more cohesive and comprehensive than ours in terms of how their brains are wired. And there's primal reasons for that and how we've evolved and developed. And so she will pick up on the subtleties of that behavior. They're hardwired to see the micro expressions in our face better than men are. And so if we can't get clear with ourselves, we won't be able to get clear with our partners. And for me, that's the game I played. I was like, yes, yes, yes. But in the shadows, I was no, no, no. So I was out of integrity. And people pick up on that, the subtlety, no matter how well you hide it. And the reality is I was burning myself inside. It was so much pain and so much guilt and shame and the compound effect on that, and just piling up on the old childhood stuff as well. It was fucking horrific. And so we have an opportunity to be truthful. So what I say to those men is, men, be real with what you want. Make a decision, be all in, or get the fuck out. Because that's what I couldn't do, and I learned the hard way. And the moment I started being all in, sometimes it didn't work out, sometimes it did. But I felt connected to here, to self. And I was proud and honorable. I was proud and inspired by the choices I was making because they were real and they were true. There was no bullshit there at all. And that's the difference between living in lies and then stepping into truth.
That is the truth right there. So as men, we tend to have issues with communication with intimacy. This might be due to what we experienced during childhood with our fathers. For men listening to this who want to communicate better with their spouse and they want more intimacy, what can they do to overcome this struggle? Because that's the thing, guys, they want more intimacy in their life, but they just don't know how to get that.
Yeah, definitely. Some men do want more intimacy. Some don't. Some think they do. And really don't, and some think they don't but really do, and they need it. And intimacy can present itself in many forms. There's at least 11 or 12 different expressions of intimacy. Sexual intimacy is one, emotional intimacy is another. They're two primary forms of intimacy that I don't want to assume, but I think that you may be alluding to, of course. And that relational intimacy as well, sharing challenges with our partners in a way that is bonded and binded. That's a form of intimacy as well as we move through those challenges too, because it builds closeness and connectedness. And so for men that are wanting to be intimate, I'm a big believer in giving, because in giving there is a receiving. And so you have to identify, what does your woman need and what does she want? Take leadership on that. Take lead on what she needs. So whether that's, because there's different forms again of communication, whether that's speaking her love language. So there's a book called The 5 Love Languages, if you haven't heard of it. It's a simple book, very well written, very easy to understand. It's a form of understanding the way we relate as human beings. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a good resource. And so that speaks to how we give and receive love. And so begin to speak that, begin to communicate that rather to your partner. Be an active listener. And again, these are general techniques, general postures we can adhere to. But they're not always going to work in every scenario. And it's about, again, paying attention to your needs and the needs of your partner. Being intentful, moving with intent. when you do make decisions, when you do behave a certain way, don't let it be unconscious. And so listening intently, listening openly, not being triggered by what your wife, your partner is saying to you, and not necessarily taking it personally. But if she's obviously speaking to you directly and asking you to make a change, don't just make a change for the sake of making a fucking change. Why would you do that? Pay attention to what she's saying. Be discerning with respect to whether it serves you. And if it doesn't, communicate that in a fair and equitable way and have a discussion. Go back and forth, because maybe what she's asking of you is not exactly what she wants, or she's very clear on what she wants, and both of you have to, I don't know the word compromise, but both of you have to make adjustments in behavior potentially. Or maybe you as a man really do need to make adjustments in your behavior if you want to be with that woman, and if maybe you're not seeing the unhealthy behavior that you're stepping into. And so paying attention, being willing to communicate, having difficult conversations, that's a starting point. There's no point in really going further than that if you can't have challenging conversations that are confronting and emotionally triggering, because you've got to go past the trigger and see what is actually being communicated and said here, what is being spoken to, what is the underlying theme, and what do we actually want from this? What's the outcome that we want? And so come from compassion, come from empathy, ask the question, what would love do now? Because I guarantee you what love would do now would not get a sword and chop off her head. That's not what love would do now. Ask that question, what would love do now? And you'll notice yourself not being emasculated, not being a weak man, just being in greater mastery of your faculties, of your internal emotional beacon. And that's power. That's where we want to come from as men.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. For people who don't know you, so you've had the honor to work with elite special force soldiers, Olympic gold medalists. That is something incredibly awesome. So did you ever imagine one day you would get to do this? And how were you able to get to work with these amazing, incredible people?
Yeah, no, I never really imagined that, actually. Interesting. I always imagined that I'd meet and I would work and collaborate with amazing people, just not in that detailed context. So yes, to answer your question, yes, and no, not in the detail. When I look back, there's two main reasons why I was able to work with and continue to work with amazing human beings. And so the first was actually, I was one of the first, myself and my business partner at the time, we were one of the first people to have a CrossFit gym in the world. When it first started, particularly in Australia back then, I live in the US now, but back then in Australia, we were one of the first. And so that opened up a lot of doors to bring in soldiers, bring in elite athletes, fighters, gold medalists, so forth. We were doing some really great things there. My business partner, he was a tremendous coach as well, and so was I. We complemented each other in different ways, and so we were really blessed to bring in amazing human beings. Actually, I sort of think about it, I wasn't really that great of a coach. It was more that I just loved people, and I loved working with people and seeing the best come out of people. And that's my second point, is that I attracted those people because I made the effort and I was really open-minded and open-hearted to bring amazing human beings in. And so that's, to answer your question directly, that's how I got to work with those types of people. So one thing led to another, people talk, hey, this guy did a great job. One, you go see him, and then it just opens doors. You know how it is.
Exactly. So I have another question I wanted to ask you. What are the 9 areas of life?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I just have 9 areas of life that I look to help people break down what life's about. So there's the four expressions of the human body. So emotional, psychological, spiritual, physical. And so, what aptitude do you have in those areas? Do you pay attention to those areas? Is there intention in those areas? Then we have vocation, we have family, we have relationships. So I'll just go through them. Then there's finance and social. And so in relationships, there's a number of components to that. There's primarily the relationship that we have to self, relationship to our beloved, if you have one in your life, or depending on your disposition, if you're non-monogamous, you may have multiple lovers, and that's fine. And then the relationship to earth, very important. And then relationship to all other things, including ideas, beliefs, material things, our environment, etc. So they're the nine areas of life.
I absolutely love that. Yes, because the 9 areas of your life is so extremely important. Now, I have another question, and this is something that can relate to every single person, because this applies to all of us. As you mentioned on your website, some men think apologizing is a sign of weakness. It is a sign of empowering. Why is forgiveness so incredibly important?
It's important because it bonds us and it connects us. It's difficult because the ego then has to admit that it's potentially wrong or didn't know. And so culturally and biologically, that's very difficult to do from a neurological and cultural or relational perspective, because it's very humbling, and that can cause a lot of pain depending on your personality type. But why it's so important is because it bonds us and it connects us. And sometimes we take, for lack of a better term, wrong action. Sometimes we hurt people, and maybe that's not our intent. But sometimes we're overzealous with our actions. We didn't think them through. This is why paying attention and moving with intention in life is so crucial, because we minimize hurting others and minimize hurting ourselves. Is that going to happen? Bound to happen. Of course it is. It's life. We live in a dualistic world. You can't have pleasure without pain. And so to the extent of how we relate to that and the extent of the amount of pain that we experience is really dependent on our level of self-awareness. And so back to forgiveness being so important is it bonds us. It bonds us and it binds us and allows us to know each other and ourselves at greater depth. And it gives us insight and perspective into the various faces of our own expression as well.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like sometimes people hold these grudges against people their entire life because they have a hard time to forgive people. But, you have to forgive.
Yeah, well, I mean, holding that grudge only hurts you. The other person doesn't know that you're holding a grudge against them. Generally, they wouldn't. And if they did, they probably wouldn't care. And so that pain that you're experiencing is yours. So forgiveness is always an inside job. The primary reason to forgive is, again, it connects and bonds us. But beyond that, actually, it's for our own peace of mind and our own health. That's why we forgive. Because it affects us physiologically. It affects our neurochemistry. If we are holding grudges or if we're angry or aggressive, I mean, excess aggression in our life builds excess calcium in our brains, and it attaches to our neurons, and they calcify, particularly in the hippocampus, and we start to lose our memory. Like our short-term memory begins to fade. Our long-term memory even begins to fade as well. We get excess amount of stress hormones released in the body, adrenaline, cortisol, etc. And that's what actually causes the calcification of our neurons. That's just not healthy. So forgiveness is an inside job. It's for us primarily.
Yeah, well, and then just speaking like what you were saying earlier, it's like, you grew up in a dysfunctional family with your mother and your father. It's like, now that I think about it, it's like, wow, I've had a lot of relationship problems because I didn't forgive my mother. And by me forgiving my own mother, that has helped me love my wife in such an amazing, incredible way. It allowed me to get rid of all that.
So good, brother. It's so good to hear that. That makes me so happy. It makes me so happy that there's that level of awareness out there as well. And it wasn't until I started becoming more aware, and I know I've got so much more awareness to jump into, that I really started realizing how many amazing people are out there doing some really deep work and really letting the past go.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best thing you can do. Like, it literally took me over 30 years to do that. And I'm like, wow, if only I did that a long time ago.
Yeah.
Could have been so much more happier. Or at least I am now. But
yes,
do it as fast as you can. Just get it over with. So, well, one of the things you talk about, so what is the toxic man and what are the two types? Because I was thinking about this. Like, for example, you hear women say, I can never find a good man. I can never find a good man. The thing is, there are men out there, but because they're toxic, that's where we have the problem.
Yeah, so I'll clarify a little bit of that. And so for the first thing I always say to ladies that are saying I can't find a good man is there's a couple of things that need to happen. They need to broaden this is just not for ladies, this is for men that also say, oh, there's no good women out there. Because we have this narrow definition of what a partner needs to be. So at some point we need to broaden that, allow more people to come in and actually experience what the resonance of something new feels like. And then we can make a judgment or a call on, that doesn't suit me, that's not a value that I want, move on. And I'm not saying that has to happen with every single value that you haven't explored, but we need to broaden our definition of what it means to be, there's no good men or women out there. And so this notion of toxicity, toxic masculinity, there's an issue. I'm not the only one that has an issue with this term. I don't have an issue with toxic behavior at all. I don't have an issue with saying, hey, your behavior is toxic, because how I define toxic behavior is it's unhealthy, it's oppressive, it's exclusive, it's namely extreme, and it's done over a long period of time. And therefore, that's how it becomes toxic behavior or toxic expression. Are all men toxic? Definitely not. Is all masculinity toxic? No. Is all femininity toxic? No. Can femininity as an expression be unhealthy or toxic or extreme? Yes. Can masculinity as an expression be toxic or unhealthy or extreme? Yes. But we need to get away from this term toxic masculinity, because what's happening is that we're saying these terms at a collective level, the collective discourse around this, and we're labeling all men as toxic, or all males as toxic, all the forms of masculinity associated with maleness toxic, and that's not fair, and it's wrong. That's not correct. And so we need to move beyond that. And we do need to understand, though, that there has been a collective energy of masculinity that has been extreme for a long time. And it's largely been adhering to what it means to be a man, but in an unhealthy way, in an extreme way that has unfortunately oppressed many along the way, including ourselves as men and the societal norms and women as a byproduct. So we have to move beyond that, and we have to take ownership of that as men and as a society and begin to move beyond that now. And so there are many amazing men out there. And I know that because you and I are having this conversation. I don't know you personally and deeply, but if you're here having this conversation, it means we're at least open to, oh, well, can we explore something different? And there are many men out there. I work with so many men that are so willing to transform, and more importantly, so willing to actually live to their own truth and be great men. Are they perfect? No. Do they have some wounding? Sure. Guess what? So do women. So do most human beings. And so it's how the difference, what defines these men is that they're willing to go through this and move through their pain. And that's what defines a healthy human being. There are many attributes. That's one of them, is that are you willing to go through your pain in order to equilibrate it and neutralize it so it no longer affects you and those that you love and care for? That's part of what it means to be a healthy, psychologically and emotionally, relationally healthy human being. And there are many men out there. And yes, we do have some catching up to do in that realm in terms of how we express our emotions and how we understand our emotional selves and our spiritual selves, because a lot of that has been distorted over time, and we haven't really been taught as men how to emote. And that's a cultural conditioning. It's not that we don't have the capacity to. We have a limbic system, we have the physiology and the neurology, we have the adaptation. It's that we haven't really been taught, and we haven't really then been taught how to do that from a place of still being in our masculine. And that's another stage as well. So first we're going to learn how to emote, and what you're seeing is that there's this other movement of saying, oh, well, that man is quite feminized because he's expressing himself or emoting in a particular way. And so we're finding our ground there, and we're losing, at a collective, I'm generalizing here, but some of us are losing our ability to still stay in our being a man and emoting, and we're getting confused with emoting with being hyper feminine. And it's not necessarily the case, but it's a transition that we're moving through. And at some point in the future, I hope sooner rather than later, we're going to be able to emote and express and still hold true to masculine virtue. And that's going to change the entire dynamic and landscape of how we relate as a species to each other and to ourselves.
Well, the amazing thing is when you think about it, all these things that we've been through, like the traumatic experiences through life, whether it was child abuse, being an alcoholic, whatever, you can actually transform that into a gift, like what you're doing right now.
Gratitude. Yeah, gratitude is a direct pathway to that gift in terms of transmuting our traumas into a tribute to ourselves. That's a gift.
Truly. And that's why I say everything happens for a reason. So for those listening to this, what would you like them to take away from this episode?
Oh, great question. Just be willing. I love that word, willingness. It's a massive part of everything that I do. It's just be willingness. Just be willingness itself, and be willing to explore what you don't know and what you're unfamiliar with. be willing to change and be willing to remain the same, because maybe that's what you need. You use willingness as something that underpins, a virtue that underpins everything that you do in your world and in your life, because there's great power in willingness.
I love that you're empowering men. That is so, so very important. So for those who are listening to this, how can they connect with you online? How do they get the opportunity to work with you?
Yeah, thank you for that. So reclaimyourkingdom.com is where my 3-month immersive online men's program is. For me, it's hands down the most comprehensive online men's program there is over that period of time anyway. It's just so deep. It's so profound. We band together as brothers. We support each other. We explore new ideals. I often say, I teach men how to be healthy men, and that's probably wrong. I disagree. So first time on air here, I'm disagreeing with what I say. Not that I often disagree with what I say. That's how I grow. But in this particular context, I don't teach men how to be anything. I present a point of view and a support system for men to explore and empower themselves, whether that ethos aligns with them. And Reclaim Your Kingdom is so fucking comprehensive. There's such depth and substance to it that if you don't change as a byproduct of being in the program, I'll be very surprised. And you can't help but change. That's the power of the program and the power of the brotherhood as well. So reclaimyourkingdom.com, and any of my social media handles, Stefanos Sifandos, Instagram, Facebook, and my website, stefanosifandos.com or stefsifandos.com.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you're doing, because that's the thing for us men. We're like so stuck in our shit, and we don't realize there are other guys who've been through the same thing, and there's help for us. There really is. We're not left on our own to just deal with this and be miserable and live by ourselves and all that.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. The next intake starts. It's already started. I'm through it now. March the 4th is when it connects again, begins again. March the 4th.
I love it, brother. Thank you so very much for being
the
voice. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Johnny here. Thank you for listening to the Power of Your Voice podcast. I'd love to get your feedback on this episode and how it impacted you. If someone in your life could benefit from this episode, share it with them. Check out thepowerofyourvoice.com to read show notes, leave a comment on the blog page, and to stay updated on all future episodes, subscribe to this podcast and leave a 5-star review. Thank you for your love and support.